Finally, we have our third presenter, Ryan Canart. He is the general manager of the Assiniboine West Watershed District. He grew up in sale barns, feed yards, and pastures across southern British Columbia. He attended and obtained a degree in natural resource management in 2002 from Thompson River University in Kamloops, British Columbia. He started a grass backgrounding operation in 2000 near Hargrave, Manitoba, where he implements silvopasture projects and management intensive grazing. In 2004, he took a job with what is now the Assiniboine West Watershed District, the largest watershed district in Manitoba. Ryan's passions include trying to maximize ecological performance and outcomes on the Canadian prairies using trees, shrubs, and livestock, as well as exploring wild places and spending time with his young family. Thank you and welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, Melissa. I think I'm gonna be a little clunky on the technology here. Great. So thank you again, Melissa, and the committee for giving me the opportunity to speak today about the programming that the Assiniboine West Watershed District offers. A little bit of context, we are up against the Saskatchewan border, and we're kind of north of the Trans-Canada Highway and south of the Riding Mountain National Park. So this is a picture of our farm in 2014. I guess I was tasked with kind of trying to ask our clientele, our stakeholders in our region, what concerns them about water resources, and if our programming is the right suite of programming to address their concerns. So I've got a network of about 83 members within the district. They're appointed by 21 member municipalities that form the Conservation District Watershed District. And so they're a broad spectrum of landowners and stakeholders from across the region, young and old, and men and women, and some rural and some urban. And so I'm also a hockey dad, and so with two kids in hockey, I spend a lot of time in the rinks for the winter, and I talk shop with the people I meet and other parents. And so I guess to boil it down and summarize it, the main concern around water and water management and agriculture, as far as I could glean, was that extreme weather. And I don't like the term extreme weather; it gets overused. But the wild variation in weather patterns that we've experienced in the last, I'm going to go decade or a little bit longer than that. The first one that really kind of kicked things off was the 2011 flood in Manitoba. So this is my little lazy fourth order stream that crosses through the farm, and there's not very many times you get to whitewater kayak on a fourth order stream, but this was definitely an event that we took notice of. It was a 2014 event that brought, between 7 and 10 to 12 inches of precipitation into southeast Saskatchewan and southwest Manitoba. This is one road failure, but it took over 70 road crossings in the municipality of Wallace Woodworth, the one I'm in, alone. So quite a devastating impact. This is a shot from 2011 when I think they maybe coined a new term, a super sandbag. This is on the 18th Street in Brandon, Manitoba. But maybe more impressive than the picture is the graph that shows the amount of volume of water that was flowed through the Assiniboine River that year. Back to 2014, the flood was in the summer. It was June, late June. I know that because it was my son's birthday. We were scattered across the ranch trying to keep power on the electric fences and all that kind of good stuff. But it closed the Trans-Canada Highway. So again, it took notice. The airport was kind of paused the flights as well. Verdon's in a bad spot because three small creeks kind of all merge in the town of Verdon, so they get it from three different sides. And then more recently, 2020 and 2021, Little Saskatchewan River watershed. This is the community of Minnedosa. It was hit extremely hard with summer rain event, and so I guess the community members are a little bit shell shocked, I would say, between massive flood events like this, and then in the mix there, we had two fairly significant droughts in 21, and then again last year, not as much as 21, but 23 was a touch and go drought year or two for lots of areas. The one thing to note about 23, I guess, just thinking off the top of my head here, was that the droughtiness was very spotty. Between 20 and 30 mile range, you'd have significant drought impact, and then 20 miles down the road there wouldn't be, and then 20 miles further the same direction you'd be back into a drought situation. So kind of an odd or spotty kind of a drought situation. So what do these intensive rainfall events bring? They bring massive erosion to the creek system. They cannot handle this kind of flow. This is just north of Brandon, Manitoba, Forest. This is halfway between Minnedosa and Rapid City, again in the Little Saskatchewan River water system. This is the granddaddy of them all, north of Newdale. Is again in the Little Saskatchewan River watershed in the valley leading up to. Context here: those pipes at the bottom of the picture you see are 3 foot diameter. So we figure this gorge was upwards of 20 feet deep and 25 feet across. And then this image here shows the Smith Creek system coming in from Saskatchewan, entering the Assiniboine River down the center of the photo. So this kind of the Smith Creek watershed been made a little bit famous. Been lots of research and investigation go on because of the extensive wetland drainage that's occurred in the watershed. So I think to summarize, the concern is how do we deal with these wild weather extremes that we've been facing the last decade or so? And I know this is a little bit of a dramatic slide, but I feel it does summarize kind of what we've done to the soils in the watershed over the past 100 years. You know, you started with native prairie, healthy, rich topsoil, and we've driven it in a downward direction, declining of the ecosystem function and whatnot. So these type of soils near the bottom of the slide obviously can't handle the same amount of water that it could, the infiltration and all that stuff. So I think you can argue, just like people argue with climate change, whether, you know, it's been hot in the past, it's been cold in the past. We've had floods in the past. There's obviously floods on record that are far more significant than the past 10 years. And is this human caused and whatnot? That distracts us from the reality that we have drained a lot of wetlands on the prairie, and we have removed a lot of carbon from the soil, and both of those have diminished the soil's ability to hold and store water for us in times of need, buffer the extremes of wet and dry. But you take a landscape that looks like this, and you take it to this, you are going to have a massive impact on the hydrological system, right? Water is going to come much faster. It's going to move nutrient and soil particles and not soak into the ground, and then it's not going to be there for the future. Back to my first passion, my two careers. I work in the conservation district. I also manage a ranch, and in 2000 we converted 13 quarter sections of ground from cropland into pasture, and it's been in grass ever since. We've developed fencing and water systems to rotate graze, and again, like I was mentioned by Melissa, this is my kind of my true passion. I really want to promote use cattle as a tool to increase my economic or my ecological resiliency and buffer against the extreme weather. When I was in university, I was told that I attended a conference by a professor from UBC. His name was Hamish Kimmins, and he showed a graph, or he showed a picture of Canada with a big red dot over southeast Saskatchewan, southwest Manitoba. He said, in 25 years, the evapotranspiration rates in this part of the country are going to double. And that was right where we had purchased this land, and I was transitioning out to Manitoba. So that put the fear in my head, and I've managed this ground to try to drought proof it ever since. So this is a shot off my back deck. Our kids see so many moose, they don't even get excited anymore. And I've got one potentially controversial statement to make, and that's that vegetarians and vegans that think that eating a plant-based diet is saving the planet or saving the environment, they don't really, I think they're ignorant to how plant-based diets are produced at mass scale. We feel that ranching cattle, they protect the grasslands. They're the only reason that the grasslands are kind of still around. And I look on my side of the road and I see all kinds of life, dozens of species of birds, wildlife, all kinds of things. This yearling calf was probably born 100, 200 yards from the house. The cow has become quite familiar with us, and she stays in calves there every spring. But across the road on the annual cropland, if you're not a canola plant, there's really no place for you, and eventually you are going to be terminated. So enough of that rant. I'm going to step through some of the programming now. I've tried to identify the issue. I'm going to step through the programming that the conservation district offers with respect to how we manage water and how landowners can improve their water resiliency and whatnot. So I'm going to start with wetlands and water retention, working with the natural features that exist already. We have a program to restore drained wetlands. Now, this is not a very hot seller. This is the only example I could pull up was of our farm in 2003, 4, 5. We purchased this land. It was grain farmed. It was poorly drained. You can see the nasty little backhoe ditches in there, some of them. So there was a program at the time. We plugged these wetlands, and as grass guys, we thought, what the heck? We want more water. We want more grass. And so the next two slides are going to be of these photo points. The first one of the blue arrow and the second one of the yellow arrow. But that's what it looks like in the early spring before the frost has come out of the soil. The water lays around, but you can see there's really no loss of forage in the sense that it's mostly upland species of grass. There's no real aquatic vegetation there. And a backstory on that, I don't have really time. Maybe we'll get into it down the road. But the next slide is a small wetland that Timothy was in the forage mix, but it has completely colonized, overtaken that little microclimate of the wetlands. So that's a program we offer. Like I said, though, it's not very well received. It is almost like regressive. You know, you have 3 or 4 generations of people that live out on the land here, and they have watched their grandfathers and fathers break and drain and be progressive when the land looked like that densely potholed picture I showed earlier. So to put water back on the landscape, I think in many people's minds is going backwards. So anyways, that would have been restoration. I want to talk about conservation of existing wetlands. So we have a program now that we will actually reward landowners for not draining. And these little blue polygons you see on the screen are calculations of class 1 and 2 wetlands. Those are the most ephemeral, shallow wetlands that evaporate up. And so if these are left intact and not drained, we will pay producers per acre per year for leaving those intact. And the biggest question I think we get is, what is a class 1 and 2 wetland? A lot of producers or landowners don't, they're not aware of the classification system we use in Manitoba to classify wetlands, but class 1s and 2s are usually farmable. So they've been cleaned off. They're easily drained as well, right? So that's why we're trying to incentivize their conservation. But you can see this and this and this. These are all class 1s and 2s. Just a slight amount of riparian vegetation there where water is sat. Okay, so that's conservation enhancement. We can also work with landowners to enhance the wetlands. So a lot of times that soil is moist. It does not respond well to cultivation or fertilization. It crusts, it gets salty, it gets compacted, and then all of a sudden it's not even profitable to farm. So for the producer that recognizes this, we will have programs that go in and sow those marginal areas down to forage that and there's a dual benefit here. They're not throwing good money after bad trying to farm those acres, but they're also preventing salinity from creeping out and from nutrient from leaching off into the water. So it's a win-win. We help with the establishment cost here as well as an annual payment. Another situation is very similar where, you know, equipment has grown in size over the years. That's no secret. So squaring off fields, getting rid of little nooks and crannies that increase overlap and fertilization and stuff like that is a popular kind of a reason to do this program as well. Another kind of more interesting enhancement project that I talk about is growing rings of biomass around them, willow planting. So back in 2011, 2012, before PFRA and Indian Head was closed in Saskatchewan, we had the folks come out and do some projects here where we were growing biomass willows around these wetlands. So again, they wanted to monitor the water flow between the wetland and the upland, as well as the biomass was going to be targeted for heating greenhouses and whatnot. So there's a shot of the willows coming along, 2012. This winter. Those willows are there now. Of course, PFRA went by the wayside, and so did this project, sadly. But we still use this myself as a stool bed for cutting willows and transplanting them other places on the farm. Okay, wetlands are on here. We're going to talk about water retention. So small dams, backfloods. We physically build a lot of water retention projects in our neck of the woods. Again, geographically, we're up against Saskatchewan. We have a lot of deep ravines that flow from the west to the east towards the Assiniboine. So it lends itself quite well to water retention on the west half of the district, not so much on the east half, but that's neither here nor there. I stole this slide from some folks in Alberta, Barry Adams and Lauren Finch from the Cows and Fish program. That goes back 20 years too. And so what we've done by draining is we've created a situation where the blue hydrograph line there represents kind of a standard, and then as we drain and we speed the water flow up off the landscape, it moves more to the red graph there. And so we're just trying to reverse that with our small dams. We're trying to pump dams back and fit all that water through a small pipe, just using these structures as shock absorbers in the system. They all have emergency spillways for times of peak flow, but when the peak flow resides, it may take a week to release the water that's trapped behind a lot of these structures. Some of them will have gates on them, some won't. Here's a shot of an older dam. Another one mentioned Verdon, so we're pretty active working in Verdon and upstream of Verdon to try to reduce the pressure of flood flows into the town. Just a quick slide to show you guys how we do this. So we rely on LiDAR and GIS to calculate the drainage area to a structure. And then when we're talking to the landowners, we're showing them the footprint of the structure and the volume of water held by the structure and whatnot. We fund these projects almost always to 100%. The landowner will contribute clay material, rock if they have it, but we see this as a common good or a public good, so we don't try to ask for any funding from the landowner. Yeah. So moving away from dealing with water directly, stepping into some of the soil programming we offer. We have to use plants or animals to increase the carbon in the soil. That's what's going to hold the more water, right? So we all know this. This slide I stole from Mr. Brown down in Bismarck, North Dakota. He came up in 2016, gave us a good presentation. And I believe that this slide might even be one of the precursors to like the 5 principles of soil health that he helped legitimize or put out into the internet. So we have, I had to, Helen mentioned cover crops. We have a robust cover crop program. So it's not maybe going the way of water quality, but we're definitely trying to store more water on the soil and in the soil with these cover crops. This slide here, I love this. This was taken on a field tour last summer. A very innovative farmer. We're trying to mimic nature here, like Gabe had mentioned in the previous slide. So we're planting once and we're harvesting 3 years worth of crops here. So we're hitting a lot of the soil health principles. For those of you that maybe don't know them, they're maximize the living root for as long as you can in the year, armor the soil, minimize tillage and fertilizer and disruption of the soil microbiome and all that. So this kind of a farming technique really hits a lot of that. And he just uses this in rotation with his cash crops. And so once you've played with cover crops a year in, year out, as we will fund those projects, we have a program that will be a multi-year process where you can employ more practices. On the left here, we've got a pollinator kind of a cover crop, and this program is funded through one of our industry partners. And so they're not beholden to rules as much as other funding pots. And so they were quite willing to entertain the concept of we're going to buy a roller crimper because some of the producers have identified that as a way to reduce tillage in crop rotations to knock a crop down and sow into it. We also have 2 zero-till drills like the one you saw on the previous slide. So we've got both the drills and the crimper roller that we will provide to landowners to try to do these soil health principles. But we live in the Great White North. I couldn't go without a slide about winter and trees. And so when the water is frozen, we still want to try to manage it. We do not like to see black dirt in the soil. That's the lightest fraction of the soil, the most vulnerable and valuable fraction of the soil. And it's a bad investment to lose that anytime. So trees and cover crops, but trees more specifically, we have a robust shelter belt program as well. It's probably been a decade since we've been able to fund cover crops, but with the rollout of the 2 billion tree program, the federal program, we've been able to target about 50 acres of shelter belts a year. We also give a generous annual payment of $200 per acre for trees for the maintenance of them. And so these are 2 shots on my farm, and you can kind of see, at least in the right-hand photo where the fence posts are almost disappearing there, they do a very good job of catching snow. Anybody that's been around knows on the prairies that when the wind blows, shelter belts can trap snow. And it's kind of funny. We had a fairly aggressive wind event, yeah, 3 weeks, a month ago, and the phone started to ring. Fellows were thinking about planting trees again, so that always helps the market that program. And lastly, about these kind of topography and tree planting, I, I'm a tree nut. I really like this kind of stuff. So I'm just waiting for the day somebody phones up and wants to try to do a real interesting project that kind of works with the contours of the land and stores water in this kind of a process. And then so I mentioned about Mark Shepard. He came up, I think he was actually at the universities where I saw him in Winnipeg. He came up and he spoke about his project and his work in Wisconsin, and he's got a book called Restoration Agriculture, and he argues in that he can produce as much calories of food on his operation as a corn crop can across the street, and that's an interesting debate in his book. But I do think that there's a place for this, especially in our parkland region, and it would be much more of a pleasant and resilient landscape if we had more of this. This one picture on the top is the only example I have of work like this in our watershed. So he's a fellow by Rapid City. He's got some contour plantings going on there. And then just to round out some of the programming, I'm going to return back to my passion, and that's kind of the rotational grazing stuff. We have several programs that support the livestock industry's adoption of rotational grazing because I think it's becoming more and more well established that proper rotational grazing can reduce emissions and store more carbon on the landscape than other forms of grazing. So the Prairie Watershed Climate Program currently supports investments in rotational grazing infrastructure up to 85% level. So very, very rich program in that respect. The goal of this program, again, to reduce emissions and increase carbon storage. And I believe that this high performance grazing does both. But again, I'm a little biased. I'm a cattle guy. You do need water and fence infrastructure to make this system perform. And it takes investments of time, which, again, with me specifically, young family, full time day job, it is not easy to accomplish all the goals that maybe you want to. So here's a shot of that same pasture where we restored wetlands, but I've got this cut up extremely tightly, and my preference is to keep cattle moving all the time. My target is 3 moves a day. Centered around the high point of the sun. That's when the sugars in the plants are the highest. And so you're trying to mimic the bison's activity, but also harvest the highest quality forage and put weight on cattle as best you can. You want to build up biomass and then push it into the ground, and that's the precursor to, I would believe, soil carbon. Both of my grandfathers would lose their minds if they saw how much grass that we waste that we leave on the landscape nowadays. But had I learned great, like, so I grew up in Kamloops outside the influence of the agricultural system in Manitoba, so I came into it as kind of a disruptive force. I hadn't come up under my father, my grandfather in that respect. So I learned about grazing from a textbook, and that's kind of maybe been a good thing. That field has been grazed, so it's hard for some people to believe, but that's when you leave cattle on a piece for 2 or 3 hours and move them. That's what it looks like. We stockpile some material too to try to get as much biomass as possible and then cram it back into the soil with high stock density. So it looks like that you've laid down that material, and then hopefully it'll be there for the soil biology to consume and convert. Under my grazing system, I've been able to maintain that healthy forage stand. That's a 24-year-old stand of alfalfa. And for those of you that maybe haven't seen that's a robust or fairly healthy stand of alfalfa there. So, and this is done with high stock density and long rest, just kind of like the buffalo would do. So, just in closing, I always like to mention this, and because I mentioned it to all the landowners too. So, if there wasn't something there that didn't fit your farm, or if there was another program that you can think of that would address soil or water concerns, we have a program for that. We will build it. So, we have a special project application where if you can come into the office and explain your soil water concern and describe how there's the environmental benefit to it, then we'll find a way to fund that project. So I'll just leave it at that, and I think I look forward to the discussion later too.
Thank you, Ryan. Excellent as always. Like hearing you present. So now we will take a 15-minute break to kind of collect ourselves, maybe have a biological break, and then we'll reconvene where we're able to interact and have a panel discussion with our panelists. So again, make sure your questions are directed into the Q&A and not the chat, and take 15 minutes and we will reconvene at 3:15. And in the meantime, if you want to type some questions into the chat, that or not, excuse me, not the chat, into the Q&A, that would be great. So we'll see you back in 15 minutes.